lovely people, welcome to another episode of Book Chat, the weekly roundup of what I've been reading at some point in the past.
Sophie Vlogs.
I have 5 things to talk about this week, and a little mix of stuff actually. So I'm just going to dive in, starting with 13 for Beginners by Jeanette Winterson. I am a big Jeanette Winterson fan. I've read a lot of her stuff by now, actually. I specifically read this because at some point, fairly recently, in the vaguely near past, I did a book that was the top 10 lowest rated books on my TBR, and this was one of them. And I was like, oh, but Jeanette Winterson, I love her. But this is Jeanette Winterson's first book. It is sort of riffing off of the Book of Genesis, and it's sort of a satirical look at a lot of those things. I have set myself to read all of the books that were on the lowest rated books, just to get a sense of what they're like, see if I agree with the rating, see if I understand why it's maybe lower rated. I will say, this is definitely not my favourite. I think the thing is, you can really see seeds of the writer that she becomes, even specifically. Like, there is a bit in this which is, she's reused it in Orange is Not the Only Fruit, and it's about something like, I want someone who is fierce and who will love me till death, and all this sort of thing. Like, every now and then you see seeds, and the orange demon that pops up in this is also reused in Orange is Not the Only Fruit. So I feel like I can really see the seeds of who she's going to become. And it's not a bad book. I just felt it was a little bit heavy-handed. Like, we are doing a satirical look at the Bible and at Genesis and at consumerism and at modern society and all of this sort of thing. And it was perfectly fine, and it's not necessarily badly done. It's just also not particularly nuanced. And I think that's what I wanted, is I just wanted a little bit more nuance. So on the whole, I am glad I've read it, because I do enjoy reading works of authors at different times so that you can compare how they've grown, how they've changed. And it is interesting to have read this and to see that. It's not my favourite Winterson. I probably wouldn't recommend it, but I also, you know... Next up, we've got Tree and Leaf by JRR Tolkien. This is a gorgeous edition. What this essentially is most of this is an essay that he's done on fairy tales, which is looking at fairy tales. What makes a fairy tale? Why do we have this misunderstanding that fairy tales are just for children? What do fairy tales tell us? That was really interesting in also sort of a mildly pedantic way. Like, I can see, like, J.R.R. Tolkien really likes to, like, categorize and that sort of thing, and what differentiates fairy tale from fantasy and all this sort of stuff. It was interesting. As well as that, there is a really sweet little story called Leaf by Niggle, which is essentially like a bit of an allegorical tale, I feel. It was really cute. It was a cute little like tale that you could read like a kid. And then also there's the poet Mythopoeia. So this was just a fun thing to dip into, because I've read Tolkien's essay on Beowulf, which I really enjoyed, and I did really enjoy this essay on fairy tales. I feel like it's given me some things to mull over. I also feel like I can sum it up for you very easily. But that's just, you know. But it's nice to read like Tolkien's academic work as well as his like creative fantasy work too. So yes, that was fun. After that is My Mother's Sin and Other Stories by Georgios Vizyenos. This is a book that I bought because when I was at university I did a module on modern Greek literature. I did English and classical studies, so I did a lot of old Greek, and I thought it would be really interesting to get an insight into like contemporary Greek literature. And this was one of the books that we looked at for that. We looked at the title story, My Mother's Sin, and I don't think I'd ever sat down and read all of the short stories in this, so I did across a period of time. And it was interesting. I feel like I'm always really bad with like what are genres of things. I want to say this is quite realism-y, because each time it goes into a lot of detail about like the people, the place, that sort of thing. A lot of these, some of the ones that I enjoyed the most are to do with like mysteries almost, but like deeply human mysteries. So like My Mother's Sin is the narrator's mother tells him about this terrible thing she did one time that's haunted her. There was another one where they're searching for their brother's killer, and that was really interesting. There were some that I didn't connect to as much, but I will say I thought it was a perfectly solidly enjoyable collection. It's not my go-to genre, but I'm glad that I've read it. And I think essentially one of the things that I liked about this is that it really goes into like the psychology of all the characters. So like a lot of the short stories, regardless of what the actual plot is, it's all about like how are these people thinking, how are these people interacting with the world and stuff, and that was really interesting. So I'm glad I finally read it all the way through. Not always my cup of tea, but an interesting reading experience. Penultimately, I read The Gender Games by Juno Dawson. I've heard so many good things about this. I was really excited to read it. One thing I will say is this was more of a memoir than I was expecting. I think that this is really great. I feel like I should preface it with that. This is really great. I wasn't expecting it to be so much of a memoir about Juno Dawson's own life, especially because the back says featuring insights from well-known gender feminists and trans activists, and then it lists some names. I think I expected it to be more of a collection of like topic essays, if that makes sense. Like Queer Intentions was like, okay, here is our chapter on like pride, here is our chapter on like same-sex marriage, blah blah blah. I think I expected it to be a bit more like that, whereas actually Juno Dawson like takes you through her life, and then also like what she has learnt about gender during that time, and also challenging some of these things that we associate with being gendered things, and that sort of thing. It was really interesting. I read it on a train journey too. I read it when I went up to Manchester Pride and back, and it was nice and easily accessible for a very hungover Sophie to read on the train, which was good. I think this is a really great book to give to anyone who is starting out on their journey of trying to learn more about our attitudes towards gender and how that's sometimes problematic, and also like what it's like for people who defy those sort of rigid binaries and that sort of thing. I think it serves as a really good intro, jumping off point, and I'm glad I read it. I'm probably going to end up lending it to some people. Finally, we're going to end on a tiny little thing which I just absolutely adored, and that's The Adventures of Luna the Vampire by Yasmin Sheik. I know Yasmin vaguely because my podcast, we did a episode on Thought Bubble a few years ago now, which is a comic festival, and we talked to a number of people who are going to be exhibiting there, and Yasmin was one of the people who very kindly spoke to us. She's absolutely lovely. Luna the Vampire is just so cute. This is Luna the Vampire, this is her little squidgy wormy thing, who I also find adorable, and this is just a series of little, like, vignettes. Here's the art style. I think the art style is so cute. It's just a series of little tiny snapshots of adventures of Luna doing things and having adventures with her friend, and I think it is so cute, and it was just a really nice thing to dip into. So if you are in any way interested in, like, cute little comics about weird little vampires who like run around the universe doing things, I would really recommend it because it's really great. That's everything I want to talk about this week. I feel like I always say this, but as per usual, leave any comments down below if you've read any of these or have any thoughts on them. I'd love to hear them. I think that's everything. I hope you have the loveliest of weeks, and I will see you next time for something different.